Recently I hit diamond using my Arcanist comp, which you can see in this video right here, and I've climbed a lot using it. And I just find it surprising that I've not encountered many people playing this comp when it's still so good. So hopefully this video makes you see how good the Arcanist comp still is from set 6. Victor's almost casting again, love to see it. That's GG for sure. The high roll Arcanist, no one can test Arcanist, it's always so free. Love to see it, love to see it. And that, baby, is what gets me diamond. Let's start with why and when you would play Arcanist. Generally, you want to play Arcanist when you have AP starter item like rods or tears, or you get an augment that's particularly strong with Arcanist. We'll talk about augments in a later section. You could also play Arcanist when it's uncontested, and Arcanist is very simple to play with the majority of your units being those that carry the trait. Also, with there being a lot of shielding right now with Scrap and Hextech and some augments like Exiles, having Victor being able to slot into a comp is really useful due to his ability to counter shielding. So Victor is a great ceiling or cap to an Arcanist comp that you can rely on. With the pick rate of Arcanist being oddly low right now, you can run this comp and hit your 2 stars and 3 stars without too much difficulty, and you can easily pivot your main carry because a lot of them use the same items. For example, Brand makes great use out of blue buff and Hextech Gunblade, but so does Ahri and Malzahar. So being able to pivot this easily between carries is very valuable because there's little risk when you slam those items. If there's a mutant player, you have the option of moving those items from Malzahar to Ahri and make Ahri your primary carry instead. And if Ahri is contested, you can have Malzahar as your primary carry. Complete. So this is what my level 8 board looks like, and obviously the Arcanists are there so it can chase the trait vertically, but there's also a Poppy and a Blitzcrank. With this you can get the Yordle economy into the late game, so you can push for level 9 and 2-star that Victor, and late game you'll have a lot of items which provide a lot of bonus HP to your squishy units through Scrap. But if you don't need that econ and need the immediate board power, let's say the game ends in a round or 2, then you can drop that Poppy and that Blitz for a Braum plus a Darius or a Braum plus a Morgana for that extra CC and that Syndicate synergy for your Ahri, so she could potentially go infinite as well. The early game board is very straightforward with Yordles. The only 3 Yordles you want to keep in are Poppy, Ziggs and Vex. If you don't have Vex you can play another Yordle. The rest you sell for econ, and you ideally want to 3-star the Ziggs and the Poppy so you can pop those Corkis and the Lulus to sell for that extra gold. Because Ziggs and Poppy are in the late game board, I would avoid itemizing them. Here's an example of an early game board. If you have tank items, I would play Blitzcrank and stand them on him. If you had AP items such as Hextech, Gunblade or Blue buff, I would play Brand and slam them on him. As you level, you play your Malzahar and your Swain. During the game, make sure you pay attention to what your opponents are playing because that would decide who your primary carry is. For example, if there's a mutant player, you may not want to have Malzahar as your primary carry, likewise as Syndicate and Ahri. If there is both a Syndicate player and a mutant player, use your econ to push level and increase the chances of 2-starring these units first and potentially hitting that Victor as well. Of course, another question is, when you get Arcanist spats, who do you make Arcanist? And I would say this is units that fit in the comp you're going, or tanks that scale off AP such as Morgana, Leona or Poppy. This makes it easier to enable that Syndicate, Debonair or Yordle. Now let's talk about items. Avoid the standard Lux items that was very common in set 6, the blue buff Infinity Edge Dual Gauntlet, because your units are outputting enough damage and it doesn't improve their squishiness. I would use Brand as an item holder for your Malzahar or your Ahri, as all 3 do great with blue buff and Hextech Gunblade. You could use Malzahar as an item holder for Victor, but Malzahar does better with the Hextech Gunblade, blue buff and Morello, and you may not even hit Victor as well. Ahri takes his standard blue buff Hextech Gunblade, but she can perform well with a Rageblade. Because Ahri doesn't have the tankiness from the Syndicate buff, I would recommend her last item be somewhat tanky like a Warmogs or a health belt component item like a Banshee or a Zeeks. If you make Rageblade Ahri, I would recommend going the Syndicate variation of Arcanist so Ahri can get that tankiness and potentially go infinite as well. Victor needs mana generation, so any item that does that or increases attack speed is good. So that's Rageblade, Shojin, Shiv, Zeeks, QSS. Thieves' Gloves is generically good because most items you roll can be useful in Victor as well. You put the standard tank items on Vex, so it's Bramble plus Dragon's Claw, and ideally you'd want Ionic Spark as well so you can get that MR reduction for the opponent units, but you could also put a Redemption on Vex as well because when she shields herself she would also have time to heal herself. You can itemize your secondary tank with whatever's left over. Usually for me that's a Zarot Portal, which I believe is a fantastic item for stalling and keeping that front line forward so your rear units don't get compromised. If you're ever stuck on itemization on a particular unit, use meta TFT because you can see statistically what performs best and use that as a reference point. Now let's talk about augments. Of course the Arcanist Heart and the Arcanist spats are great because it allows you to chase that trait vertically. So let's look at the item / component generating augments. Components are more flexible than full items, so Thieving Rascals and Jughead are great at making your board stronger with extra items, but you can't drop Yordle or Scrap. And with Thieving Rascals you can skill that Lulu for that early Yordle. Likewise, item grab bag and component grab bag are great, but you could hit items like Deathblade, which is kinda useless in an Arcanist board. Portable Forge items are great too, the ones I particularly like are Randuin's Sanctum, Zonya's Paradox and Manazane, and the Radiant Relics are also fantastic. Now let's look at the defensive augments. Finally, frontline secures your backline in the early game, and in the late they can make up for your lack of frontline and stall for the Ahri and Victor casts. The runic shields allow you to focus on damage, like building chalices of power, and not be punished too hard because that extra AP gets turned into extra shielding. Phalanx is great because your squishy units become tankier. Verdant Veil means your units don't get CC'd and they can more reliably get their casts off, which means more damage. Makeshift is great because your secondary units get tankier. Celestial Blessing is great because your units are doing a lot of damage and healing off that and getting a bonus shield is very valuable. Now let's talk about the combat augments. Spellblade is just such a great augment that allows all your units, even Ziggs and Bran, to scale great into the late game because of that Spellblade damage. Cybernetic Uplink is a great augment which means your carries have more HP and cast significantly more. Blue Battery is extremely significant for an Arcanist board because then Bran doesn't need to blue buff and can be ulting after every auto. Also, Ahri and Malzahar cast significantly more frequently, which means more Malzahar healing if he has Hextech Gunblade, and Ahri can scale much faster. Electrocharge can be very significant against assassin players, and if your tanks are tanky enough, they can output a very large amount of damage with this. Luden's Echo gives your team a lot of splash damage, which allows units like Bran to scale better in the late game because he is casting a lot. Archangel's Embrace allows all your Arcanists to scale significantly as the battle progresses, especially those who are casting frequently. Ahri's damage is exponentially increased with this augment and Vex gets even tankier. Jeweled Lotus increases the burst damage the units are doing. Binding Airdrop is just a great augment and your scrap value becomes significantly great as well. Even though you don't fully itemize all your units, the unpredictability adds to your board is still very substantial. Meditation is a decent augment because the secondary units cast more often, so your unitemized Brand and Ziggs are going to be ulting more often, and Swain is surviving for longer. This can pair great with Spellblade. Although I don't recommend these augments, I'm going to mention them anyway. So Golden Ticket seems good, but you lose a lot of board power and you need to hit 7 to reroll with it, but because it's Prismatic Lobby, you can't really stay at 7 for too long or other people will begin to outscale you. If you can hit with it, it's great, but otherwise you'll get outscaled. The free reroll from Trade Sector is good, but you should be rich enough from the Yordle Econ. If you're popping a Lulu or a Corki, then you could see that as a free reroll. So what are the strengths of this Arcanist comp? Well, it's very straightforward and very simple. The items are simple, the units are simple, there's simple rerolling, you have flexible carries, and there's a great econ boost with Yordles, and it's so easy to go into it from Yordles as well. There's a high ceiling in terms of strength, you can hit some very strong units in the late game that output a massive amount of damage. Now let's talk about the weaknesses of this comp. The frontline can be very weak, and usually there's no CC, that's why I run Blitz or Braum. And if the squishy backline is CC'd or it's hit by assassins, then you are more likely to lose the round. There isn't a great item order for Victor, it could be Malzahar, but you'd be losing a lot of potential there. To summarize how you play this comp, you would play the early game Yordles, ideally Poppy, Ziggs and Vex. You sell the extra Yordles for econ. Then as you level, you play your Swain, your Blitz to strengthen your front line, and Brand Malzahar to strengthen your damage. You econ to level 7, reroll for the Malzahar 3 or the Vex 3 or the Swain 3. If multiple units are contested, just push level for the Ahri 2 and the Victor 2. But yeah, hopefully this video makes Arcanist a bit more appealing to you. I think it's still a very strong comp, and it's really underplayed.